Welcome to the Lit Culture, a space for literature and culture. Today, we are going to discuss all the ages in the history of English literature. And in this lecture series, in this channel, we will discuss all the literary ages one by one. So today's topic is an overview, a brief discussion on the history of English literature. History of English literature started with Anglo Saxon or Old English period. The timeline is 450 to 1066. Now the question is, what happened before started this Anglo Saxon or Old English period? At that time period, the land which now is called England was like that. The north was called Northumbria, middle is Mercia, and Wessex, here is Kent. Now there were, before Anglo Saxon, different types of tribes like Celt and Gaul and Britain, from where the word Britain came. Now they had their own languages, tribal languages, Celtic and Gaelic, these two tribal languages. For the study of literature and the cultural study, we have to remember three things for the understanding of the development of any kind of literature. That is, growth of languages, development of languages. Second, religion, most important. And last is historical and political situation in a society. So, and all these phenomena have a great connection with any kind of literature, to the development of literature. Now, in 54 BC, Roman Julius Caesar attacked England and made a part of Roman Empire. We know that Latin was their language. So, Latin replaced the native languages or tribal languages, Celtic and Gaelic. And the Roman left the land in 410, but the language Latin continued till 450. Now after that, after the departure of Roman, the land was open for all to invade. As we know that in Old English time period, there was no concept of line between two countries. There was no concept of nation, country, border. So, German group of people, Jutes, Angles, and Saxons, they invaded the land of England. Very interesting that these Germanic people had their own language and religion. Anglo-Saxon religion, they believe in earthly glory and they do not believe in afterlife. They believe in pride and action in life. So we know that already there is Christianity grounded, because Saint Augustine, a Roman cleric, arrived in 597 and King Ethelbert of Kent was converted to Christianity. So in this situation, language is different. There are many languages and even the religion, paganism and Christianity. So what kind of literature can grow? This is the question. So if you can understand as a student of cultural study what kind of languages, what kind of religion, what kind of historical and political situation were grounded in Old English time period, so you can find out the features of literature, what kind of literature can grow. It make you understand better. So we can find in Old English time period some kind of features, that is caesarius, pause in line, alliteration, Why alliteration? We know that alliteration is a repetition of sound. So it is very pleasing to listen, even easy to remember. Because Old English time period literature was oral and even also written. Kennings. They use kenning. This is a type of style that is a metaphorical phrase. For example, bone house. The phrase bone house is used for body. Now, we can find some important poems like Beowulf, Odyssey, Wanderer, Genesis, Christ, okay, and Wanderer a lyrical elegy. Prose. Prose also begins with King Alfred, and the prose writers are Alfred, Alfric, and Ulfsten. Now, this is the beginning of Old English time period, and this is a short view of Old English or Anglo Saxon time period. Now, after Old English time period, 1066 to 1450 Middle English period. This timeline is called Middle English period in History of English Literature. 1066, this year is most important because Norman conquest happened. People from France came, invaded the England, and French became the language of the rural class people. In this time period, we can find Chaucer, poems, chronicles like Lemon's Brood, religious poem like the Ormulum, the Owl, and the Nightingale, and we can find different kind of romances, matter of England, matter of Britain, matter of Rome and France. And medieval period has a great influence to the writers of romantic period and even in the modern writers like T.S. Eliot. Prose, Pearl, Purity, Patience, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. These are also involved with the alliteration revival. 1340 to 1400, late medieval or the age of Chaucer. Chaucer is most important, one of the most important figures in the history of English literature because he gave the proper shape of the language English. English emerged as a language form from East Midland dialect. Important, it's East Midland dialect. And in this time period, we can find 1337 to 1453, 100 years of war. And 1348 to 1349, Black Death. Black Death is important because this changed the structure of society. We can find the shortage of labor and emergence of middlemen, and they are called yeomen. In 1381, we can find peasant movement. Works of Chaucer, Canterbury Tales, House of Fame, Troilus, Cressy, and many others. With Chaucer, John Gower is one of the most famous poets. He wrote Piers and Plowman. That is very, very important. This is a political and religious poem. Some poets are also influenced by Chaucer and they are called Chaucerian poets. We can find Scottish Chaucerian and English Chaucerian. Now the end of Middle English. In this time, there are few writers who followed Chaucer, like Thomas Hogcliffe, Lydgate, and I just told Scottish poets. We will discuss later. Baron Age. This end of Middle English is called Baron Age, 1400 to 1485. So why this is Baron Age? Because it is just after the death of Chaucer and there was no such productive, innovative or creative work in the field of literature. And we can find 100 Years of War and War of Roses. This incident is very, very important. Wars of Roses, 1450 to 1487. Okay, this is the timeline. And it happened between House of Lancaster and House of York. And what is the result? The result is in 1485, finally, Yorkist King Richard III was defeated by Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry Tudor became a king as Henry VII and married Elizabeth of York and united two houses. So, here Henry Tudor a great administrative skill, and he is the man who first time united these two houses and the conflict. Now it started Tudor dynasty in the history of England, and it continued till the death of Elizabeth in 1603. After the Baroness, we can find different movement in literature, and these movements are the most important incidents in the history of English literature because it changed the views of human society, and it totally so for these movements we can say Renaissance 1500 to 1600. So what is Renaissance? Renaissance is the revival or rebirth or new learning. Now, what kind of revival? What kind of new learning? This is the revived knowledge of Greek scholars and discovery of the new land, emergence of scientific knowledges, and in this time period we can find printing press. Now, Renaissance mainly started in Italy in 14th century, but it reached England in 16th century until the beginning of Elizabethan period. For the better understanding, the scholars in the history of English literature divided the Renaissance in different timeline. That is 1500 to 1558 age of revival. So why age of revival? Because of in this time period we can find Renaissance humanism. What is Renaissance humanism? Renaissance humanism that in Old English time period or before this timeline, the society in the center of the society there was God. So the society was theocentric society. God is everything, God is responsible for everything. But in Renaissance humanism, after that, human being put himself in the center of the society. They started to value the human entity. Human being is responsible for everything, whether it is good or whether it is bad. Now, how it happened? It happened because of some scholars. Scholars from universities of Oxford and Cambridge, and they are John Colet, Erasmus, William Latimer, and others, brought a movement called New Learning, that is, a recovery of accurate learning of classical text. Now, a conflict started between those scholars and the institutional Christianity. What is institutional Christianity? That is controlled by church and the religious authority. Now the scholars said that they no longer depend on, now they start to the religion directly from the original text of religion. So this is the kind of rejection of authority. And in this movement we can find Thomas More. Thomas More Utopia is the landmark. In 1516 it was written in Latin, and it represents the humanist state rather than Christian concept of state. So it shows the conflict between the scholars and between the authority of religion. And 1535 we can find beheaded of More. These all are important in the history of English literature. Just a reminder, it's a lecture on the overview of history of English literature. So we'll just highlight the most important figures, movements and writers, but not in detail for the better understanding. But it will help to understand the people from the, we can find some poets in this time period. Thomas Wyatt, Henry Howard, and they introduced sonnet form for the first time, and they also introduced blank verse. Prose writers: Reginald Peacock, William Caxton, for the first time printing coffee and literature. Okay, John Fisher, Thomas More, William Tyndale, Miles Coverdale. William Tyndale and Miles Coverdale, they are associated with translation of Bible. Drama, mystery play, miracle play, morality play. Now 1558-1603, this timeline is called Elizabethan age. 1558, Queen Elizabeth came to the throne, and 1588, England defeated Spanish Armada. And this incident is important because it added some heavenly quality to Queen Elizabeth. Literary works we can find sonnet, lyric, drama, prose, etc. This is the heyday for drama because Marlowe, Shakespeare, and others. Literary figures: Sir Philip Sidney, Spencer, Walter Raleigh, Bacon, Ben Jonson. 1603 to 1625, Jacobean age. 1603, death of Queen Elizabeth, and James I came into power. And in this timeline, in this time period, we can find Shakespeare's great tragedies. Prose writing: Bacon is important, Robert Burton, Anatomy of Melancholy, King James translation of Bible. 1625 to 1649, Caroline age, reign of Charles I, and we can find in this time period English Civil War. And Cavalier poets, they are important: Richard Lovelace, Suckling, and others. They are called son of Ben. And a great movement in literature, that is metaphysical poets, we can also find in this time period. 1649, execution of Charles I by Puritans. So metaphysical poet, they have a great role in the history of English literature, especially for the writing of poetry. John Donne, Marvell, they are the metaphysical poets. And T.S. Eliot also wrote an essay on the metaphysical poets, and we will discuss later it. It is very, very interesting. 1649 to 1660, Commonwealth or Puritan age. Oliver Cromwell came to the throne, and 1658, death of Cromwell. 1642, this is important because Puritans closed the public theatre. Political pamphlets we can find in this time period by Milton, Thomas Browne, Fuller, Taylor, Cowley, and Marvell. Milton is the most important figure. His Paradise Lost, Lycidas, very, very important landmark in the history of English literature. Now, Neoclassical period, 1660 to 1785. Why it is Neoclassical period? Because they follow the ancient classical writers from Greece and Rome, and they try to imitate them, and they put logic and reason in literature. They try to find out logic and reason, rationality in literature. So Neoclassical time period also divided in different parts, that is 1660 to 1700, Restoration age or Age of Dryden. 1660, Charles II restores the throne. So what happened? Theatres opened. Restoration comedy began. Comedy of manners. It's a entertaining form of comedy. John Dryden dominated this age, and even side by side we can find Wycherley, Congreve in the theatre. 1700 to 1745, Augustan age or Age of Pope. Pope is one of the most intellectual literary figures in the history of English literature. So why this age is called Augustan age? Because the writers follow the literary period of Virgil, Horace, Ovid, and they worked under the Roman Emperor Augustus. So that is why this age is called Augustan age. And the literary figures are Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, Joseph Edison, and 1744 death of Alexander. This time period is very important and interesting because of political pamphlets and emergence of cafe house. Cafe house became the place for the discussion of literature and political debates. 1748 to 1785, age of sensibility or age of Johnson. Samuel Johnson is a critic and poet and a most important literary figure. Samuel Johnson dominated this timeline, and we can also find some poets just before Romantic ages like Robert Burns. A Romantic period 1785 to 1837. In this time period we can find Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, and for this reason the people become very monotonous, and we can find an urge in the society to return to nature. And we can find the preface to lyrical ballads what are the features of the Romantic writers. And preface to lyrical ballads was published in 1798. This is very important. And in this lyrical ballad you can find poets of Coleridge and Wordsworth. 1832 Reform Bill was released, and the literary figures are William Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, Charles Lamb, and others. So, in this Romantic time period, we can find essayist, novelist, Jane Austen is important, and poets and dramatists also. Now, the Romantic age is a vast area. We need a particular discussion on this age, and we will discuss later it. 1837 to 1901, Victorian period. 1837 we can find accession of Queen Victoria. 1901 death of Queen Victoria. Literary figures are Lord Alfred Tennyson, Robert Browning, E.B. Browning, Christian Rossetti, Arnold, G.M. Hopkins. Essayist Thomas Carlyle, John Ruskin, Arnold, Pater. Prose fiction Bronte sisters, Charles Dickens, Thackeray, Gaskell, George Eliot, Hardy, Butler. Prominent literary movements Pre-Raphaelites, Aestheticism, Decadence. Okay, now Edwardian age. Edwardian era 1901 to 1914. We can find death of Queen Victoria 1901, 1914, World War. And the writers in this time period wrote W.B. Yeats, Kipling, Galsworthy Sinch. There were Georgian group of poets who wrote during the reign of George V. Edward Marsh published an anthology entitled Georgian Poetry between 1912 and 1922. Now modern period 1914 to 1945. This modern period is marked by multidimensional experiments in subject matter, style and form, and psychoanalytic approaches in literature, stream of consciousness, etc. And the writers T.S. Eliot, F.R. Leavitt, Virginia Woolf, W.B. Yeats, modern poets G.V. Shaw, Samuel Beckett, and dramatists who introduced meta-theatrical play. Okay. Then 1945 it begins postmodern. In the postmodern age we can find different kind of literature, different kind of fictions, play, dramas. So this is the overview of the history of English literature. Thank you very much.